So I think the last episode was a little bit tense, maybe a little bit dull. First video, I was a little bit nervous, so my bad.
Are you ready? What's happened?
So we're finally starting this build, and for anyone that's been following me for however long, last year, I think before COVID hit, I said that I was going to start this build that year. And so finally, after a long wait, we finally begin. My old kit off the version 4 is already off, and it has been sold already. So I decided I'm gonna make some temporary fenders out of sheet metal. That way I can maybe just screw them on, take them off whenever I need to, because this is my daily driver, and the last thing I want to do is get pulled over for having 6-7 inches of tire and wheel stick out the side of my car. So my past builds usually started off, almost never started off with a design. I just had an idea in my head and I would build and go with the flow and, basically freestyle the build. I mean, there were some cases where I did do a sketch or a basic drawing of what I was going to build, say like version 2, but then the actual drawing just never ended up getting finished. So this new build was supposed to be simple and it's for my daily driver, and I daily drive my project car for those that don't know that. And the design was supposed to be simple for it, but I thought a little bit So I thought of this idea of a floating wide body kit or a floating fender kit, and how that works is basically you would have the panel of the car, and your fender would basically almost free float off the car. My idea was to have like pegs or studs holding the fender onto the car, but I thought about it and the last thing I wanted was to have hardware showing on the fenders. So I decided that I was going to cover up that free space and make it look like the fenders were floating in a sense. And another reason why the fenders basically can't be free floating is because when you have that space or gap between the actual fender and the car, and say your wheels are rolling, you're going to get a whole bunch of debris and rock chips and whatnot flying through that gap, and it's going to scratch up your paint and, say in my case, vinyl. So usually when I have an idea and I just imagine in my head, I can see the basics of what the product is going to look like. In this case, I had a very hard time imagining what this wide body kit would look like. So this time I ended up actually drawing it out. So that's that. Should we begin? I shouldn't even be asking you guys. Let's go. All right, I'm Yoonicorn, and this is Isabel version 5, Yoonicorn. So what I ended up doing was I took a picture of my old car, or version 4, and then I threw it on this app on my iPad, faded out the actual picture, and then began drawing lines over it, as you can see. And honestly, I think it took me about 100 different times to actually get the lines I wanted and the design I wanted. And then eventually, well, it's not finished, but I started coming up with this. As for the front lip, I played around with some ideas, but I think I just wanted something a little bit more subtle. Ended up basically just drawing the lines, shading it in to, give it a little bit more of a, not realistic, but a more conceptual image. And we'll take a look at maybe a couple different other views. Rough draft. But I should probably explain to you about the floating fender. And what I decided to do is that, say if the car is one color, as in the red, the floating fender, instead of actually leaving this whole part gapped so I don't have stuff flying out of it, I'm gonna block it off. And by blocking it off, you know, at least I won't have, you know, stuff flying out and, oops, jeez, and, you know, scratching my vinyl, or if this was someone else's car, you know, maybe their paint, and, you know, just one thing that's nice about viewing the rear is that, you know, there's a little bit more that you can see about it. And let me find the actual fender. Is that it? Maybe it was this. I mean, I got a couple drafts. I mean, it started off kind of like this with a whole bunch of rough lines, and just trying to figure out what I wanted with it. And then eventually with those lines, I was able to finalize a lot of the lines and then get on to coloring it in. I don't know if this is the side skirts I actually decided to do. What is this? Alright, we'll just go with that one. And then let's go with this. So there is the floating fender kit. I actually gave it the name of the Moonwalker Aero system. It's a kind of cool name, yeah. But yeah, completely floating, and then completely, well, semi-completely floating, because I guess the front part is going to be connected to the front lip. So, and then we get onto the ducktail. I did sell the wing as well. Where's the ducktail? But I did come up with this ducktail design. And the nice thing about this ducktail design is that it follows the curves basically of the rear of the RSX. So in a sense, geez, I keep forgetting that. It'll follow, okay, that's not it either. It'll follow this curve. Oops. It'll follow this curve, as well as it'll follow this curve. So say if you were to look at it from like the side, it'd be like this, where basically the taillights go, and then it'll kind of curve up like that. Here's the trunk. The ducktail would rise up with this curve. Jeez. So there's the ducktail. One special thing about this build is that I wanted to do something completely new and different with the exhaust. And this is actually something I've seen online, but I was never able to find a picture of it ever again after I've seen it. And what that is a exposed exhaust setup, where basically the muffler, the piping, everything is exposed like so. There's actual lines for it. We'll get more into that later on as we actually get into building the exhaust. And same thing as the ducktail, we'll get more into that later. And this, and this, and this, whatnot. But basically you guys can tell, like you guys can see somewhat what the car will look like. So now that we have a design or a basic idea of what we're going to be doing, we're going to take that design and we're going to put the outline of it onto the car so that we can proceed onto the next steps.
So the temps are off, so I'm just going to explain this real quick. When I first cut my fenders for version 2, I did a very rough job. I didn't know anything. I didn't know what I was doing, so I did a horrible job actually. So we're gonna get these cleaned up as well. And it's not even sealed in the rear. I'm gonna start off by making a template, so I can use it on both sides. I'll just use some bond paper or something like that. I'll put it up to the car, draw it, cut it out, basically like a stencil. I got the lines drawn on there already. I got 2 cut lines. I'm gonna take off this paper, cut out the paper, and then I'm gonna start with the fender line right here because I'm going to recut the fenders. And then we're gonna trace that out, and then afterwards we'll cut this out, and then we'll trace that out, and that's where the shape of the fender will go. Now that that part's cut out, we're going to use tape, and then we're going to outline it with the tape, and then we're just going to stick it on there for now. Before we get on to doing the actual lining for the actual fender, we got the tape on, and then now we're going to take off the stencil or template or whatever, and then we're going to move it to the other side so we can get the same lines for the fender cutting. Finds out that when I cut these fenders 5 years ago, I did such a horrible job that they're completely uneven. I ended up having to re-cut out this template, so just so I can make it work on this side. Now I have to go back to the other side and take off more. So I went on the other side, I revised the cut line, and then I cut out the paper template for the actual fender itself, the fender line, and then moved on to this side, and as well as just filling this all in. And then I also inverted the cut lines to make it easier when I'm cutting, so now we won't need this. Peel it from the other side. And we will not need this anymore. So there's that for now. And then as well as the other side. It's done. Let's peel this off. On this side there's a lot more cut. Okay, that's done. Probably do the bumpers later. And then, as well as the lower fender. I'm not sure then I'm gonna have to cut it. So pretty much the fronts are done. Except for the lower part of the front bumper. And before we go on to cutting the fenders, we should probably put this part done. My other camera died while I was recording the process of this, like midway. So I got this far on the rear, and I actually did this reverse from how I did the fronts. And how that is I actually left the actual fender, this white part, instead of cutting this part out. And then just ended up taping the outsides, which was a little more waste of tape, but I feel like this is a lot easier than doing it the other way. And then now all I have to do is take the white paper off and then basically fill the inside and then rip the outside parts off. So the rears are finally done. Not really done, but so good to go. Yeah, I think this way worked out a lot better than when I did the fronts.
And then temporary fenders go back on so I can drive the car home. So now that we have an idea of what we're going to be doing, we're actually going to get into making something next time. So make sure you hit that subscribe button for more to come. Also, if you have any questions or if you want updates or to see my past builds, make sure you hit me up on Instagram at emi.yoon. And I greatly appreciate you guys for watching, so I'll catch you guys next time.